Welcome to this lecture about pragmatics, and I'm very glad to make a modest presentation about pragmatics and its interplay with semantics, of course. So, as you know, within the tradition of the British analytical philosophy in the 1960s, saw the very successful birth of another new interdisciplinary subject called pragmatics. Of course, this discipline is based on the work of Austin, 1962, on his famous work, How to Do Things with Words. And it is especially the study of John Searle, 1969, his student, on speech act theory, and the influential essay of Grice, 1975, on what we call conversational maxims. Um, these works, of course, sparkled the flow of studies on language use. And I spot again the light on language use, which means language in context. Extending the traditional work on focusing on syntax and semantic properties with the pragmatic component, and accounting for what we call in pragmatics the illocutionary functions of language in terms of speech acts, inflectures, and other aspects of contextually based use. So, generally speaking, we can say that pragmatics has become the discipline that houses many of the studies of language use beyond the grammar, such as the influential work on politeness by Penelope Brown, Stevens, and Levinson in politeness theories, of course, also based on the work of Irving Goffman, the notion of face. So we can say that pragmatics is concerned with our understanding of language in context. And of course, we can distinguish between two types of context. We have the linguistic context and the situational context. By the first one, we mean the discourse that precedes the phrase or a sentence to be interpreted. Whereas in the second one, which is the situational context, or it means the virtually everything that is non-linguistic in the environment of the speaker. So a close look at I think making small difference between semantics and pragmatics is, of course, we can define semantics as that branch of linguistics concerned with the meaning of propositions, whereas pragmatics is another branch of linguistics that is concerned with the use and function of language. And also, it is concerned with the relationship between the structural properties of an utterance and its deployment and reception by language users. Um, Traditionally speaking, meaning has been studied by various scholars and has been also studied by examining those sentences with expressions or which express propositions which have what we call truth value. So if I, for example, say snow is white, or the cat is on the mat. These examples in semantics, we can say that which is concerned with the conditions under which the proposition expressed by the sentence is true. Snow is white if, or snow is white is true if and only if snow is white. And if we can say, for example, the cat is on the mat is true, and here I'm explaining to you this truth condition, okay, or it's very important as a notion in pragmatics or in semantics. If and only if the cat is on the mat, if and only if the cat is really on the mat. Of course, the interplay between semantics and pragmatics is very, I think, crucial, very important, because both branches or both disciplines deals with meanings. But the only difference, of course, is that pragmatics focuses, uh, I think, too much or gives too much importance to the context. Now, what if to discuss this interplay between pragmatic semantics and also syntax? I mean, theoretically speaking and practically speaking, this has a lot of practical consequences from the work of the scholars I have already cited, Austin, Searle, Grice, and also Brown and Levinson. The linguistic theory in general has been concerned with syntax semantics interface, mainly with the issue linked to the scope of operators like negation, quantifiers, models, and also which with the syntax or semantic nature of the structural representation and etc. and so on and so forth. One important trend in the syntactic theory is devoted to the syntactic pragmatic interface with a strong argument in favor of the syntactization of pragmatics. It means pragmatics has to do with more liaison with references within the structure of the sentence, okay, reference, the sense of the word, meaning of the words, and so on and so forth. So semantics and pragmatics as a module in within the syntactic theory played a great role. But my focus in this presentation is, of course, to talk about those elements which are, I think, very important in pragmatics. So the focus of my presentation will be on one important principle in pragmatics that is called Felicity Conditions. So what do we mean by Felicity Conditions? So in pragmatics, which is how to do things with words, and the speech act theory, the term Felicity Conditions refers to the conditions that must be in place and the criteria that must be satisfied for a speech to achieve its purpose. Okay, I repeat it again. So, felicity conditions refers to the condition that must be in place and the criteria that must be satisfied for a speech act to achieve its purpose. So to put this quite differently, you can say that as of course Mark Lieberman, an instructor at the University of Pennsylvania, once pointed out that a sentence mustn't only be grammatical to be correctly performed, it must be also litigious or well suited for the purpose it is pronounced. And I think here it would be very important to give an example to illustrate this is to talk about I think the marriage ceremony, for example, or marriage scene in a movie. Have you ever asked yourself why the word, for example, I now pronounce you husband and wife, do not create legal marriage between two people when uttered in the context of a film set? So it's quite evident because they are playing roles of husband and wife, but in real life they are not. This is not true. But of course, the actors in the scene are not really legally married, even if they both say "I do" before a clergyman or or clergy person. So the conditions are not. So here we can say that the conditions are not in place and the criteria are not satisfied for the speech act to achieve its purpose, namely the bride and the groom enter into a marriage that is legally binding. And the person here, making officializing this act has no legal authority because it's just a movie scene. It is not real. Okay, so has no legal authority to pronounce, I would say, the two people as husband and wife. Hence, one would infer from this small example that the speech act in the movie marriage scene is not fictitious, simply because it is not real. Um, so to explain this felicity conditions is to try again to um, uh, elucidate or to clarify the various types of felicity conditions. And I think we have four types. The first one is what we call the propositional content. The propositional content, which means that the authority or yeah, yes, the propositional content requires that the participant have to understand language, not to act like actors. Okay, this is the first thing. The second thing is that, or the second type of felicity condition is called preparatory felicity condition, whereby authorities or the authority of the speaker and the circumstances of the speech act are appropriate to its being performed successfully. Next, it's called sincerity felicity conditions, where the speech act is being performed seriously and sincerely. The last one is called essential, where the speaker intends that an utterance be acted upon by the addressee. The example I have just given you about the marriage scene in a movie, uh, I think explains well these four important elements in the felicity conditions or types in felicity conditions. But let me explain this more deeply. Suppose, for example, I am in a play and I'm going to deliver the line. So I say, I promise to kill the evil Don Fernando, or I promise I will kill Mr. Ali or Mr. John or whatever, whoever he or she might be. So I haven't, in fact, promised to kill anyone. The speech act here can be said to fail because among other things, I must have certain institutional authority for my words to have the appropriate illusionary force. The speech act fails because the words are uttered in a context where they are not used by the speaker, but the effect quoted from the text. Now, I think in this example that I have just cited, the speech is can be regarded as infelicitous. Why? By virtue of the fact that it doesn't meet the propositional content condition, because the person he is actually acting when he say I'm not going to kill that or something like that, so he's just acting, and he's also doesn't meet the preparatory condition, the second type of felicity condition. It doesn't meet the preparatory condition because he certainly doesn't have the authority to kill anyone, and he doesn't meet the sincerity condition because he doesn't actually intend to kill anyone, as noted, and he is only acting, of course. And lastly, he doesn't meet the essential condition because he is not expecting that his words will be acted upon. In other words, he doesn't actually intend for someone else to kill Fernando or Ali or whatever. So let's move now to the this very important issue of performative utterances. Performatives, related to some verbs like warn, like promise, like act, etc. These are performatives are utterances in pragmatics in which you can say saying is doing. Saying means doing. And they are not, and this is of course has to do strong relationship with how to do things with words. And they are only successful if certain felicity conditions are fulfilled. Say, for a speech act to be fulfilled, it must satisfy the four important types of felicity conditions. And for this to be achieved, we have to consider the following elements. First, the sender believes the action should be done. I mean, when you say an act or when you advance a speech act, for example, then you have to believe that your action is true. The receiver, of course, has the ability to do the action. Okay, and third, the receiver has the obligation to do the action too. And lastly, the fourth element is that the sender has the right to tell the receiver to do the action. So if any one of these conditions is not fulfilled, we will say that the utterances are not felicitous. The reason is that felicity conditions are conventions that speakers and addressees use as a code to produce and recognize actions, uttered by the speaker. In other words, um, when somebody, for example, performed a performative utterance, for the felicity conditions to exist, the speaker must utter words that are heard by the receivers, and the receiver then should take some kind of action based on those words. If the speaker is unintelligible, it means he's uttered an utterance that is not well interpreted or understood, then here lacks of authority or status to speak those words, or uh, is insincere, or the utterance is insincere. Then utterances in general can be said or can be characterized by the fact of being not felicitous. They are infelicitous. But if the listener doesn't act on those words, then the speech is also infelicitous. So the only condition that remains in this regard is the fact that only if all of these conditions are met are the utterance from the speakers considered to be felicitous. So thank you very much for this brief explanation about a little bit about pragmatics, but most importantly about one of the major principles in pragmatics, which is felicity conditions. We shall have more explanations, I think, in the classroom. Thank you for your attention and see you in another video. Bye.